leading us in that. I don't know about you. I'm excited today to dive back into the topic of hope. Last week we talked about our "if I could just" statements, those places we put our hope, and we realize that the truth is we won't be satisfied until we're satisfied with God. That is the reality. That there are so many things we could hope in and so many things we could want and believe will meet our desires. And the reality is until we are satisfied with God, we won't be satisfied at all. And, truthfully, one of those realities for my family is if we could just get back to the UK for vacation, then we would be really happy. And that's a true statement, by the way. Like, we love going to the UK. We got to go a couple years back, and we spent a few days in all over the continent, but we got to drive through the Highlands, and it was gorgeous. And then we spent about 5 days with friends at a shared estate and just got to soak in the presence of God. We got to spend a few days in London, which was awesome, not just because it's a great city with a lot to do and really good food and meat pies and all of that gorgeous goodness, tastiness, but because of the architecture. And you're just walking around and there's abbeys and there's palaces, and it's just amazing history that you just feel as you walk through the streets. And I don't want to brag, but we got pretty good at the public transportation. Other than like the conversion rates and how the Oyster cards actually worked, we didn't do so great at that and ended up leaving like $100 in public transportation on cards, but that's beside the fact. So we got pretty good at riding the tube, the underground public transit. And one of our favorite things was every time the tube stopped and the doors would begin to open, the speakers would come on, and there would be a lovely British voice over the speakers telling you where you've arrived to and that you should mind the gap. That you should mind the gap. And what they mean is there's this gap between the train and the platform that you have to step over. And it's not really that big, honestly, but they want you to mind the gap. They want you to be aware that there is a gap there so you don't trip, you don't fall, or maybe there's an elevation change there a little bit. Maybe you have to step down. And it would be both embarrassing and dangerous if you don't mind the gap, right? That's a good word for us, actually, in the church today. And it's a good word for me. One of my issues is that sometimes I don't mind my own gaps. I don't always make sure that I'm aware of where there's a gap. And the gap that I'm referring to is the gap between our written code and our lived code. My stated values, the things that I say are good and that I should walk by and that I should live out, and then the values that are spoken about by my actual actions. And if I'm being honest, it's a little bit painful at times to admit there is a gap that I'm not always minding and I fall in the middle of between what I say I want to be about and what my actions say I want to be about. And that can be oftentimes a pretty big gap. My prayer has always been, especially as a 3 on the Enneagram, where I can be deceitful and present something about myself that just isn't reality. I always want you to look at me and see something that is better than it actually is. But the truth is there's a gap between who I say I want to be and what I actually do. And it's a hard one to manage. But I don't think it's just me. I think that's true for a lot of us. I think you see that all over the place, that we have this culture of celebrity where we like to put people up on pedestals, and they usually get put on pedestals because there's something we see in their skill set or in their attractiveness level that we would like to be ourselves. And when we look at them, we think, if I could just be that way, then maybe I would be as good as them. Right? If I could just be as good as that person, or if I just had the skill set that they had, then I would probably be as good of a person as they are. And we forget that just like it is for us, it is with the people, the celebrities that we put up on a pedestal. There's a gap between what they actually do and what they say they want to actually do. And the sick and twisted part of us, and the sick and twisted part of me, kind of rejoices when some of those celebrities fall. And it's not just outside of the church, it's inside of the church too. I'm not just talking about Hollywood celebrity or social media celebrity. I'm talking about Christian celebrity as well. You don't have to look back that far in the headlines to realize that we get a kick out of it even when Christian celebrities fall. The most recent is a pastor, Carl Lentz, out of one of the Hillsong churches in the U.S., and he was like a local and more than local Christian celebrity. People put him up on a pedestal, and he had an affair on his wife, and he fell from grace. And what do? We celebrate that. Why? Because we like it when we see that there's a gap in somebody else's life. Because we feel that. We see it and we think, good, I'm not alone. And the only difference is our life isn't publicized. The reality is if your life and my life were publicized, people would see the gaps in our life that we have not minded, that we have not been aware of, that we have not paid close attention to, and we have fallen into that gap and we've stumbled. And we get excited when we see that happening in other people. In fact, our whole tendency whenever we do notice a gap before somebody falls into it is we like to point it out. We like to look at other people and we like to point out their gap, but very often we forget about our own gaps. All the while we're tripping and we're stumbling and we're falling and we're getting injured, and it leads to death. Mind the gap in your own life, in my own life. You know, the sad reality is that you can look back through the records and you can see headline after headline. Before Carl Lentz, it was somebody else. It was Jerry Falwell Jr. or it was somebody else. And we look at them and we say, good, they got what they deserved. And we forget that they are us and we are them. And while they are not innocent, while they should be removed from their position, or they should have some kind of punishment, while they should get what they deserve in that instance, all of us should be getting what we deserve. All of us, if we're honest, deserve something for the gap that we find in our life. And I don't know about you, but try as hard as I may, I cannot significantly reduce the gap in my own life. I try, I will fast, and I will pray, and I will do things that are meant to discipline me spiritually so that this gap between what I say I believe and what my actions say I believe is lessened. But it's just not working. And it feels like defeat sometimes. It feels really, really horrible, and so I very easily look again to other people and where they stumble and think, good, they got what they deserve. Now I can stop thinking about my own gap for just a second. Whether you're in the church or you are outside of the church, it doesn't matter. This is a common reality. You can look at any social justice movement that is happening right now, any hashtag movement on social media or any political movement that is happening, and you will find a significant gap between a written set of values and a lived set of values. It does not matter where you come from or what you believe. You will find a gap if you look for it. For some of us, it's a lot easier to see than others, and some of us are just better at hiding it than others. But the reality remains the same, is it doesn't matter what we do, that gap is not something that we are capable of fixing. So I want to go to Scripture. I want to try to resolve some of this tension that we're feeling around the gap, because the truth is there is hope. And it's not just a veneered hope. It's not a hope that looks good on the surface, but eventually we'll realize the gap that was there. This is a real, true, authentic hope, even though you and I are not always real and true, authentic hope. So we're going to go to Isaiah 53. Again, it'll be up on the screens if you're following along at home or if you don't have your Bible with you here. You can just follow along on the screens. Verses 2 and 3 of Isaiah 53 says this. He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of the dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Now, this is a significant passage for a number of reasons. First, because of who is saying it and to whom it is being spoken. It is being spoken to the people of Israel. And there are 52 chapters before this of the history of Israel and all of the places where they've fallen into their own gap, where they had a written code, a written set of values that they were meant to be lived by, that they agreed to live by, but that they weren't living by. In fact, if you had looked at the lives of Israel over history, you would see that if it were to be described on paper, you would probably come up with a very different set of written down values than what they said they wanted it to be. And so we have 52 chapters of Isaiah calling out Israel and saying, this is what you are guilty of. This is where you've fallen into your own gap. And now you are going to be punished for it. And God is going to remove you from the blessings that he had given you. And you are going to have a time where you are conquered and where you are ruled and where you are destroyed. And a lot of you are going to die because of it. I mean, if you're reading through the prophets in general in the Old Testament, you're going to find that it's a little bit depressing, right? Like it's doom and gloom. I can only read like one prophetic book at a time because when I read all the way through them in over the course of a shorter period of time, I just get depressed. It is all doom and gloom. Why? Because it is focused on the gap of how people are living, the gap between their written code and their lived code. And it points it out because God sees it. You see, the people of Israel had an agreement with God that they would live one way, and when their actions didn't line up with that, God removed his blessing. He removed his protection. He removed all of the things that were good that had to do with being in relationship with him, and so it opened them up to all the bad things of what it means to be outside of a relationship with God. And guess what? Israel had made a lot of enemies along the way. And now without the protection of Yahweh over them, they were subject to all of these nations, and all of the things that they had done in the past is now all going to be on them because they fell in the gap, that gap between written and lived. And we have 52 chapters of that, and then we have a prophecy here about a hope, about a Messiah, about a rescuer, about one who would come down the line in the future. Isaiah foretells about the hope of the Messiah of the people of God. That is all going into what we have right here. And so Isaiah starts to describe what's known as the suffering servant. The servant is really the Messiah, the rescuer, and he starts describing him as one who would grow. One who would grow up like a shoot out of the dry ground. Now, this makes sense for a number of reasons, and while imagery is being used, what Isaiah is pointing to is the reality that this Messiah, this suffering servant, would actually grow up. And he would grow up in a time where the ground is dry. Or, in other words, he will grow up in a time where it seems to be a little bit of a famine spiritually, where things are hard. In a hard time in Israel, when things are dry and barren and there's not good happening, this Messiah will grow up. Grow physically, he'll grow emotionally, he'll grow mentally, he'll grow in every way that you could imagine a person growing. Now, this might just kind of be like common sense to us. Of course, people grow. But somewhere along the line between the foretelling of the Messiah and the coming of the Messiah, Israel started to develop some weird understandings of who the Messiah would actually be. So not only did they have a gap in their living, they also had a gap in their understanding about the Messiah. There's gaps all over the place, and none of them were being minded. Somewhere along the line, Israel starts to understand that the Messiah is not somebody who grows, but as it says in John 7:27, when Jesus is in his own hometown and he's doing the work of the Messiah, they say, "Who is this person? He can't be the Messiah. We know where this man is from, but when the Messiah comes, no one will know where he is from." Somewhere along the line, they developed the understanding about a Messiah that he's just going to appear out of nowhere. Now, if you stop and think about it, that's actually not that hard to understand how they got there. We all like things that we're not familiar with. Familiarity breeds contempt. Familiarity brings contempt. I'm sorry I made you all just talk at the same time, but that's different than singing, so we're going to be all right. Familiarity breeds contempt, and somehow they started to understand that the Messiah would come out of nowhere and that they wouldn't know where the Messiah would come from, that he would just show up on the scene and that he would fix things for them. And what would he fix? He would fix things politically. He would come in with military might and he would ride and he would rescue and he would make things the way they were. That Israel would be restored to what it was. The problem was Israel was always thinking that what they had was good. But very rarely was what it was thought to be. It was not as good as it was meant or was thought to be. It was not good as it was understood to be, and it was not where God was leading them. There was something better. There was something that God had to lead them into. And so when the Messiah comes, he wouldn't just fix what was on the surface level, that if we could just be a powerful nation again, if we could just be a nation with a king and we could just put everything back to the way it looked, then things would be right again. This was the understanding of the work the Messiah would do in Israel, that he would set things back to right, and things would look exactly as they did before. But the problem is, we all know how veneers go. Veneers are just surface deep. You can scratch beyond them, and you can reveal what is actually under the veneer. And Israel almost always was under a veneer. Just like us. We're almost always under a veneer. I'm really good at veneers. I'm really good at looking the way I want to be perceived. My guess is you've learned to adapt to that as well because it gets us by. And if this Messiah could just come along and restore my veneer, then things would be pretty good. But they aren't. That's a lie and it's untrue. So Isaiah starts with laying the ground for this Messiah, that he is one who will grow. He will not pop up out of nowhere. In fact, this Messiah is not somebody who is flashy. He's not this celebrity who's going to come in and ride in and just deliver you. He's not going to come in with great oratory skills and be able to do amazing speeches and rally around a crowd around him, build an army out of it, and conquer Rome. That is not what will happen. He will grow up, and there will be nothing attractive about him. I hope nobody says this about me later on in my life, but nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. Right? How's that for hope? Hey, so you have somebody, he has to grow up and he's not going to be a looker. There will be nothing special about him. There will be nothing significant that you look at him and you're like, yeah, I want to put him on a pedestal. I want to raise him. There was nothing about the Messiah that was foretold that would be glamorous or glitzy or unique or gimmicky. How many of you get tired of gimmicks in marketing? It's like we can smell them and we can see right through them now because it's just a go-to. We know it's a veneer, and when we scratch down beyond the surface, we find somebody that just wants to sell us something. They're not out for our good. They're out for their own good. There was no veneer with Jesus. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. You know what, Isaiah, for prophesying the hope of Israel, you're not doing a great job on selling him. Right? You're not doing a great job on selling us the Messiah. He's got to grow up. It's going to be a process. He's not going to be good looking, and everybody's going to hate him. This is your Savior. This is your Messiah. It doesn't seem very hopeful, does it? It didn't seem hopeful to Israel either. They were thinking somebody would come and save them. They were expecting might and power. They were expecting glamorous kingliness, celebrity. They were expecting to celebrate him and to accept him, not to reject him, not to hate him or despise him. Hope at this point doesn't seem like hope. For Israel, hope at this point of the prophecy does not seem like hope. Isaiah has a little bit more work to do in order to help them understand that this person, this Messiah, this rescuer is hope. And he's going to have to connect some dots, but here's the point he's getting at. Hope isn't hope. Hope isn't hope, not to us and not to Israel. Hope isn't hope until we realize something. Until we realize the depth of our own brokenness. Hope is not hope. For Israel, hope was not hope until they realized the depth of their brokenness. And for us, hope is not hope to us until we realize the depth of our own brokenness. So we continue on. We're going to read verses 4 through 6. Surely he took our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. So here's where Isaiah digs down and he starts connecting some dots for Israel. And he starts saying, this person that you're not expecting, this person with no veneer, this person with no gimmicks, this is the hope of Israel. This is the hope of the entire world. Let me tell you why. Because when he comes, when he is rejected, he will suffer for us. He will take piercing, he will take crushing, he will take pain and suffering and punishment. And for us, that will be a good thing. You see, here's the reality that is being painted about the Messiah, is that he is one with no veneer and he is one with no gap. That what he says he will live by is what he actually lives by. But he will become suffering, he will become a substitute, he will become a trade for us who have a massive gap. Biblically, the punishment for having this gap, the punishment for having broken relationship with God is death. That's just the natural consequence. It's not like you did this, now I have to punish you. No, it is the natural consequence. In relationship with God, we get life and life eternal, life that starts now in fullness and goes on forever. But apart from God, we lose that. It's just the natural course of events. We get what we wanted, and when we get what we want, we fall in the gap. When we fall in the gap, we die. We get injured. We get hurt. We suffer. But the good news, the hope of the Messiah is he takes that suffering. That when he suffers, it's for our peace. When he's pierced, it's for our good. When he is punished, it's for our healing. By every stripe that now, because we know the story of Jesus, means the suffering that he served on the cross and before the cross, by those stripes, we are healed. There's a role reversal that's happening in the text. That Jesus gets what we deserved, and we get what Jesus deserved. And when Jesus got what we deserved, there were people that were cheering. They were excited that somebody fell. They were excited that somebody seemed in the same boat with them, and now they could celebrate him, but not in the way they thought they would. They could celebrate his downfall. Isaiah says, that's for our good. That's for my good. That's for your good. But hope is only hope to us if we realize the depth of our brokenness, so we understand who the Messiah will be. We understand what happens when he comes, that there's this trade, but we don't understand yet the depth of our brokenness. And that's where Isaiah 6 comes in. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. I still remember my dad teaching, I don't know if it was a youth group or Sunday school. He was just knocking it out of the park, trying to help us remember Scripture and translate it into our youth culture at the time. And so in the 90s, there was some phenomenal hip-hop going on. And so my dad put this, it just lends itself naturally, right? My dad put this verse in a hip hop rhyme for us so that we could just remember. And to this day, when I read that, I can't unhear it. Like, that's just like early old school DC Talk or Beastie Boys kind of stuff. Like, that's what's happening right here. You can just read it and hear it. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to their own way, and the Lord has laid on them the iniquity of us all. Right? So, that has nothing to do with what I'm about to say. That was just, I can't get out of that. So, what we have is we have Isaiah pointing out to us that this is why all that has to happen. Now, one of pastors' favorite things is talking about sheep, how dumb they are, and how stinky shepherds are. And I don't know why, because actually that's not the point here at all. It doesn't really matter how dumb sheep are. I mean, it does to an extent, but it certainly doesn't matter how smelly shepherds are. What does matter is this, and this is the main point. You and I are like sheep. And sheep are always in constant search for pasture. They're just grazing, and they're going to follow their own way because they think they know where the pasture is, even though the shepherd has already led them to food. They're never satisfied with that. They're always going to wander away, and it will be to their detriment. They will die. That is why we talk about them as dumb. But that's not the point. The point is we are dumb sheep. I am a dumb sheep. Now, that might seem harsh. I get that. But I'm not sure how else you would characterize, and I think Isaiah captures it very well. I'm not sure how else you would capture or describe the reality that no matter what God does in my life, I keep living with the mantra, I am Lord. I keep going off and thinking the world around me revolves around me, and my actions don't affect anybody but myself, which is a lie. And so I can live however I want. I can live according to my own truth. I can do what I want. I can go where I want. I can do whatever I want, and it doesn't affect you. It only affects me. But I will most certainly fall in the gap. That is why the sheep analogy, it fits so well. You and I, we're like sheep. It doesn't matter how many times God reveals himself to us. It doesn't matter how many special touches or experiences we have from God. It doesn't matter how many times we hear from him. We will almost always assuredly go our own way, and I will almost always declare at some point, even if it's not in my written code, it's in my lived code, I will at some point express, I am Lord. Now, hope starts to feel like hope because it doesn't matter how much I try to live differently, it doesn't change. It doesn't matter how hard I try to be perfect, I will still fail my family. It doesn't matter how much I try to be better, it's not working. I am still really messed up. But it's okay because so are you. And if we're all being honest, if we're all minding our own gap, we'll understand that. And now hope can start to feel a little bit more like hope when we realize the depth of our own brokenness. If I can just be honest for a second, I am so far from perfect. And I feel a little bit weird saying this, but there's times that, like if I'm being truly open and honest, I will use my wife as a joke so that I can get laughs out of people, so that I can appear better. And I don't always realize I'm doing it, but that's not the person I want to be. That is a gap between my written code and my lived code. Sometimes I'll be sitting on my phone when the family is having fun together and they call out to me and I say, yeah, just a second. And I'm doing nothing but browsing social media. And guess what? There is a gap between my lived code and my written code. That is not the kind of father I want to be. But this is who I am. And if hope is going to be hope, not just to the world, but also to us, you and I have to recognize the depth of our own brokenness. No one will do it for us until it's too late, until it's publicized, until we can be looked at and we can be mocked, until it can be put on display and others can, for a moment, forget their own gaps. You and I have to mind the gap. And in fact, the world has never been more receptive than they are now to a people who are willing to do this. There's a problem right now in the church in that generations, the younger generations, have never left the church faster than they are leaving it now. And there's a few reasons for that, but one of the main reasons for that is that the church, that's you and me, okay, we make up the church. The church has a veneer. It's a veneer that tries to cover up the gap between who we say we want to be and how we actually live. We just cover that with a veneer and we fall into it constantly. We think it's a really good veneer, but the truth is it stinks. It's no good, and it is seen through easily. It's not even a thick veneer, it's a surface. It's like that paper veneer. Doesn't even stay nice for a day until a kid bumps against it and it's just off of that cheap bookshelf you bought. That's the veneer we have. That's the veneer people see. Because in trying to present hope to a world that desperately needs it, we are so focused on their gaps, we forget our own gap. And in trying to bring hope to other people, we disqualify ourselves from the hope that was given to us too. We say hope is good for them when they realize the depth of their brokenness, and I forget that hope is only good to me. It is only hope to me when I realize the depth of my own brokenness. Young people are not stupid. They see it, they smell it, they see right through it, and they don't want any part of it. They don't have to follow the rules, they don't have to follow the traditions, they don't have to do any of that to live that way anywhere else. Only in the church is a place where you have to live according to all of these rituals and all of these different expectations and live no differently. Profess no differently. Act or believe no differently. What the world needs now is what characterizes this passage. It characterizes both the suffering servant, the Messiah, and us, and it's one single word: humility. Humility is what characterizes every bit of this passage. He was young and he grew up. He was from humble beginnings. There was nothing in him to attract us to him. He was humble in appearance. He was rejected. He was of low esteem. He was humble in his relationships and in his social status. The world treated him in accord. We treated him in accord, and we treated him as one who is humble. It also describes who we are supposed to be. It describes who we are supposed to be if we are meant to be a people who both receive hope and extend hope, is we have to live with humility. And step one for living with humility is understanding the gap in our own lives, that we are all dumb sheep. That inevitably we will default to our internal code of brokenness, which is I am Lord. It doesn't matter how hard we try, we have to realize it doesn't matter how hard we try, it doesn't matter how hard I try, I can't fix what's broken in me. It doesn't matter how hard I work at it, my faults are still my faults. Your faults are still your faults. We still fail people. We are still sick. We are still tired. We still grow weary. We still deal with anxiety. We still deal with depression. We still feel the loss and the backstabbing and the hurt and the pain, and try as hard as we can't fix it. That's a good place to be. That is the place of humility, and it is in that place that we can start to realize the hope of the Messiah, the one who takes the penalty of our gap, and the one who lived and died and rose again in such a way that he heals the effects of our gap. So step one in living with humility is realizing the depth of our brokenness. Step two is living with reality of our brokenness, of sharing it with others. Paul, the apostle and author of a lot of the New Testament, said it this way, that he will boast in his weaknesses so that Jesus, the Messiah, can be elevated, so that Jesus, the Messiah, can come to the forefront. If I'm always holding myself up on a pedestal and talking about your gap, then you never get to see Jesus. You only get to see me as the Messiah, and I will fail you. You will see through my veneer. Especially as you spend more time with me. It will not take long. But when I can boast, when I can be humble and honest about my own brokenness with others, then people will see, oh, wait, there's something different. This is not just lip service. This is not just the reality that there's a gap between their living and what they say they want to live as. They recognize that, and they're powerless to do anything about it. But the hope is that Jesus is powerful to do everything about it. That is the need for the Messiah. If we can live with humility, if we can recognize our own brokenness, and then we can be honest with others about our own brokenness. The reigning capital today socially is authenticity. People can see, they can smell a gimmick coming a mile away just the same as you or I can. They know when they're being sold something. What people need now is that humble authenticity where we say we don't have it all together, but we do have hope, though we can't get it all together. And today I commit that I will not live in any other way. And I'm not always going to do it well. I'm not always going to do it perfectly. But I'm committing to you today to not live with a veneer, not even a hint of a veneer. If you smell a veneer, it's just a misstep on my part, and I'm sorry. But hope is hope when I can realize the depth of my own brokenness. So let's do that. It's always hard work. It's simple. It's not easy, right? We can be a people of hope. We can be a people that the world will receive hope from if we can live with that kind of humility. The way the Messiah before us lived, and the way the people after him are called to live. That's us. It's you, and that's me. Can be a people of hope with humility and honesty. No veneers. Let's pray.